Hey guys, welcome back to the Behavior Revolution Scriptures, where right now we're in the middle of Leviticus, trying to breathe some fresh life into this dull old book of Leviticus. Well, I always thought it was anyway. Leviticus are Numbers. Oh, well, let's bypass those ones and keep going. No, Yahushua's shining a spotlight on this amazing testimony, this amazing information that's being brought to us today in the 21st century from Leviticus. And it's all about behavior. It's all about it's all about the sacrifices and offerings that Israel had to offer up. And there were 5 main ones. And we've only dealt with the first 3 in the last couple of episodes. We dealt with the ascending near offering, which was to come up to me and be accepted. Yahushua's opening the door and say, come to me like you would for little children. Come to me. Don't stand all the way back out there in the camp. Come to me. That's what this burnt or ascending near offering provided. The smoke would go up into his nostrils and he'd be pleased, and they would see that and they'd know that they'd done the right thing and they were accepted. This sacrifice was to make them acceptable. And then the second sacrifice was the love grain offering, which was a plant-based offering. And that was, of course, with salt. Don't forget the salt of the covenant. Don't forget my blood covenant of deliverance with you. So that was about making a vow to obey the commandments. And so that was kind of like your second love tribute to Yahushua. Once you were accepted, then you could bring a love tribute. Not because you'd done anything wrong. These sacrifices were not because Yisrael had done anything wrong at this point. The first 3 were just voluntary sacrifices. So, and then of course the third one was the intimate peace offering. And that one, of course, once you had done sacrifice 1 and 2, opened the doors for you to have a relationship with Yahushua again and have your relationship restored. So these first 3 sacrifices were dealing with who we are, and the next 2, which we're going to start doing today, starts dealing with behavior. So, of course, sacrifice 1, come to me to be accepted. That's what we all do when we come to the door. Yahushua is the door. We go into the waters of immersion and we come up acceptable, washed clean, set apart, able to enter boldly. We are found acceptable to him. And then the next one is we go to the mountain to learn how to please him, to learn how to, to get to know him and have a relationship with him, to learn how to be the bride, learn what's expected of us. That's the second sacrifice. And the third sacrifice, of course, is to have peaceful, intimate peace with him. Shalom. Remember we talked about shalom and the full understanding of that word shalom, a total, complete sense of wholeness and well-being from top to toe and in every aspect of your life. That's that word shalom. So today we're going to come to the 4th sacrifice, or the 4th offering, which you probably, reading other translations, have known this one as the sin offering. The sin offering. I've called it the purifying offering. Why? Have a look in the turquoise here. Most translations call this the sin offering. However, this offering doesn't deal with the specific evil behavior committed, rather in cleansing the person who has become unclean through disobedience. And that word sin again, sin, that's a functional translation again, because these the translators couldn't get their act together and work out, well, there isn't really, in the instance of this word here in the Hebrew, there isn't really a pure meaning, literal meaning to translate into English for it. So they used, instead of using a literal translation, they used a functional translation of a sin offering. The problem with that is people are throwing around this word sin these days. Sin for this and sin for that. Everybody sins, the whole world is sinners, all sin's the same, and all sin's been washed away by Yahushua. All this stuff, well, that's not all true. Not all sin is the same to Yahushua. And we're seeing that, and we'll see it more as we go along. But the thing is, all these different sacrifices and offerings had different meanings, and as we go on, you'll see that they were for different disobedient behaviors. So it wasn't just sin is sin. and all sin is the same and all disobedience is the same and all that. It's not at all. Different severities of behaviour require different severities and expenses of sacrifices as we go on. So it's not what we all thought, you know. We just use this word sin to cover all of it. I don't like that word sin. It's religious. I don't like it. It means to miss the mark, and it means to be disobedient. So use a word that makes sense. But as far as this offering goes, why didn't I call it the disobedience offering? Because this particular offering, number 4, is not dealing with the actual behaviour. This offering is dealing with the person. So instead of saying this is a sin offering because you're a filthy sinner, we're going to go into it more as we go through this, but it's more about being purified. Because when you disobey Yahusha, 2 things happen. You become unclean, so you can't be mixed with Yahusha because you're unclean. That's what the disobedient behaviour does. It's like being poisoned. You've got the poison in you, disobedience. And the second thing that happens when you disobey Yahusha is you fall into debt. And when we say, the idea of debt in scripture is there all the time. And when we think of debt, we think of financial. If I said to you, oh, debt, you'd instantly think money or financial situations. The idea of debt in the scriptures is not like that. Often the recompense was money or sacrifice, but the whole idea as far as Yahusha is concerned is the debt is like a personal, emotional, you know, like compensating for personal injury. You know, like you injuring his set of partners. It's like a literal assault on his set of partners. You're severing. So that's the whole idea. The reason we are punished for our disobedience is not because he's up there with this big ego and, oh, you've disobeyed me and I can't stand you, you know, you're undermining me and this and that and this and that. It's not about his ego. It's the fact that when you disobey him, he can no longer, you're severing the relationship. And even though in the 21st century, the blood of Yahusha covers any kind of severing, we are still presented as set apart. The relationship is still not the same until we come to him and repent and vow not to do it. Do you understand? So it's not with the offerings, and the same with consequences and punishment, it's not about him wanting to punish his bride. The world's a different story. But as far as Israel and his bride, it's not about him punishing us, it's about us injuring him, injuring his set of partners. And therefore we need to, make reparation, make a sacrifice, to pay. So that's what the debt is. Does that make sense? My point is here, we've called it the purifying. I've called it the purifying offering because that's what this offering did. It purified the person. Instead of just labeling them a sinner, this offering didn't deal with their behavior. The next offering deals with the behavior. This offering dealt with the person and how to get clean again. So, does that make sense? So, offering number 4, the purifying offering. Then Yahusha said to Moshe, give the following instructions to the children of Israel. This is how you are to deal with those who disobey any of my instructions unintentionally. So remember, these are still unintentional trespasses, unintentional crimes, behaviours. If the high priest is disobedient, that's interesting. If the high priest himself is disobedient, he brings guilt upon the entire community of Israel. And he must give a purifying offering to be cleansed of his disobedient behaviour. That's not fair, is it? The whole community is guilty because the high priest disobeys Yahusha. That's what it was like. The Hebrews had a very cultural mindset, like if enough of us do the wrong thing, then we'll all be punished. The innocent will be punished with the guilty. So it was very important to obviously try and keep your neighbours, don't do that, come on, we'll be punished. And often you'd be thrown in together. If you're in the same township or tribe or whatever, that tribe, plenty of times in scriptures a certain tribe is punished. You're telling me every single person in that tribe is disobedient? No. But see, Yahusha does what he wants and declares what he declares. And once the amount of filth, wickedness, behavior reaches a certain point, he just goes, no. We saw that when he destroyed the world through the flood. We saw that when he destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah. There were innocent people there. His ways are not our ways are not his ways. So in this instance, the high priest, if he's a disobedient, he brings guilt upon the entire community of Israel. And he must give a purifying offering to be cleansed. Why? To be cleansed of his disobedient behavior. If the entire community of Israel, a leader, or even a common individual becomes unclean by disobeying one of my instructions, but they don't realize it, they are still guilty and unclean and must give a purifying offering also, once they realize. So, we're starting to come into different tier social status here. There's the high priest, there were tribal leaders, there was the nation itself, the common folk, and they all had to do different things, once they realized this was the purifying offering. Once they realized, this is what you do. Bring a male or female animal with no defects to me at the entrance of the tabernacle, a young bull for a high priest. So it had to be the crème de la crème for the high priest, because he's the most important person in the nation as far as being set apart goes. So if he disobeyed, then the most expensive animal had to be offered. So a young bull for a high priest, or a community of Israel, a male goat for a leader, female goat for a common person. And if a sheep is presented, it must be female. This section here went on for about 3 pages, pretty much saying word for word the exact same thing, but switching out a sheep for a goat. So I've put things in brackets just to bring it into one, because we get it. So different people presented a different animal based on their status in society. And the hand of the guilty one, so if it was the high priest, his own hand, a leader or individual, his own hand. If it was the whole community of Israel that was disobedient, then the elder's hand is to be put on the bull's head. Remember, always had to lay hands on the animal's head before you sacrificed it, because in the turquoise, that transferred the evil from the person to the animal. Literal living blood of the living, innocent creature, substitute sacrifice. So it was a real sacrifice. It brought real forgiveness. It wasn't just some second-rate, second-class covering. Remember, we were always told that? In the Old Testament, they couldn't be forgiven. Their sins couldn't be forgiven in the Old Testament. Yeah, they'd just be covered. Animal blood can only cover. Not true. Many times in Scripture, if you look at it deep enough and close enough, you'll see real forgiveness, washing away and cleansing, reconnection with the Creator, Yahushua, once again. So animal blood had the power to forgive, because it was real, living, live blood. An innocent creature's blood was shed so that you could live. So what was the purpose of Yahushua's sacrifice? Yahushua's sacrifice was for intentional crimes. Remember, none of these animal sacrifices were for intentional crimes. This is just for unintentional. What about the people who lived their life or were executed because of for intentional crimes, on purpose, high-handed, premeditative? That's where Yahushua came in and he cleansed all. Isn't he amazing what he actually accomplished? And then he walked around and forgave people, even though they'd committed intentional crimes. And they hated him, but the religious authorities, because he didn't have the right to do that, apparently. Anyway, transfer the evil from the beast and then must be slaughtered before me. The high priest for himself, or the priest for the leaders of the individual nation, will then take some of the bull's blood into the tabernacle. So we're going into the tabernacle this time. It's not just outside in the outer court, mincing and cooking and burning and smoking and, big barbie out there, and then we get to eat some and present some and take some out the back and burn it, that's all outside. This one, now we're taking the blood. If it was the high priest who was guilty, he would take it in. And if it was a priest or a leader or an individual, the priest would go in, because only the priests were allowed, or high priest, in the inner court, the set apart place. And if it was the nation, it was the priesthood. Take some of the bull's blood into the tabernacle. Dip his finger in the blood. Before I go on, there's a little picture there. The priest of the entire community had a bull, a ruler, a male goat. An individual could choose one of the following options. So remember, they didn't always have lots of produce or animals, so it wasn't about, particularly the common folk, it wasn't about how rich you were, it's about the heart condition, what you presented. So at the simplest level, you could just bring some flour, some semolina. So anyway, what were we talking about? So the high priest or the priest, depending on the guilty party, would take some of the blood into the tabernacle, dip his finger in the blood, and sprinkle it 7 times before me in front of the inner veil of the set apart place. There's some animation of that in my introduction, which was from the Bible project. That was amazing, some of that stuff. It's a shame about the names and the pagan terminology, but the animation I thought was just amazing. And he's sprinkling the blood. So he's symbolically just purifying, washing away, getting rid of all the impurities and wickedness. So sprinkle it 7 times before me. 7 is the number of perfection. In front of the inner veil of the set apart place. Then put some of the blood on the horns of the altar of fragrant incense that stands in my presence, inside the tabernacle. Why that one? Because that was the altar of incense. That was the form of communication, remember? The prayers of the saints, communication. Presence in the tabernacle. He will pour out the rest of the animal's blood at the base of the altar for an ascending near offerings at the entrance to the tabernacle. Then he must remove all the fat of the animal to be offered as a purifying offering. This includes all the fat around the internal organs, kidneys, fat around the loins, long liver. Then, for the leaders and individuals only, he must remove these along with the kidneys, just as he does with cattle offered as an intimate peace offering. Meaning it was used for food, they could use it for food. And burn them on the altar of ascending the offerings. But if this offering is to purify the high priest, so if this offering is to purify the leaders or individuals, he could remove the kidneys, all those sort of things, as he does with the cattle, But if this offering is to purify the high priest, he must take whatever is left of the bull, its hide, meat, head, legs, internal organs, and dung, and carry it away to a place outside the camp where the ashes are dumped. There, on the ash heap, he will burn it on a wood fire. And through this process, the high priest will purify the disobedience of the nation, leader, or the common individual, or himself if it's the high priest, making him right with me, and they will be forgiven. Forgiven. It's the literal Hebrew word for forgiven. Forgiven. Real forgiveness, real connection, real peace with your Creator once more if you offer this sacrifice. So, in the turquoise there, animal sacrifice can forgive unintentional disobedient behavior. While the first 3 Levitical sacrifices were all about allowing Yisrael to come near to Yahusha and establish a peaceful relationship with him, this 4th sacrifice brings a whole other aspect to the nature of disobedience, its effects, and the deadly assault on Yahusha's set apartness. So we're learning about disobedience now, the repercussions, and how it's a deadly assault on Yahusha's set apartness. Okay? There's a picture there, I'm not going to go into that. It just illustrates what we've just talked about, really. So, interesting, that little box down there. A special purifying offering, sin offering, for all the people was offered on the Day of Atonement. So if you all the sins, all the disobedient behaviours that accumulated that you may not have known about, just because we're a fallen human state, were offered by the high priest on the Day of Atonement. That's what that feast was about, to purify the whole nation. Hopefully, as we go through this, the gravity, the weight of disobedience will become apparent, because coming out of whitewashed Christianity type beliefs, you tend to just don't care about it, because you think, oh, you just wiped all that away, he washed it all, he died on the cross and blah, blah, blah. We don't have to concentrate on that anymore. And if we try to do any kind of work or perfect ourselves, we're earning our salvation. So see how it's all ass up and weird, There is real disobedience, and there are real consequences for disobedience. And as we go through Leviticus, it's going to be, here we go, look, disobedience, lawlessness. The reason why it's important to properly understand the nature of disobedience is because it's a threat against a peaceful blood covenant relationship with Yahushua, and can also bring about many unintended and unforeseen consequences that are often irreversible, such as Yahushua's wrath and judgment, which is an aspect of his character that most people don't want to accept. Only that he's all good and loving and kind. He's still the same living Elohim. He still feels the exact same way. His wrath and his judgment. But people don't want to talk about that side, do they? By the time we're finished Leviticus, we will all understand just how serious disobedience is from Yahushua's perspective. So now we come to atonement, where love and justice meet. We come to the Hebrew word kafar, which is to purify, cancel, atone, cleanse, forgive, pardon, purge, reconcile. Cover used to be in there too, but cover is not the right word, because complete atonement doesn't just cover. It completely purifies, cancels it out. It atones, it cleanses, forgives, full forgiveness, full-fledged forgiveness. And that was what kafar means. That's what atonement is. That's what blood did for us. It atoned us. So down here, when the Israelite performed the proper sacrifice with a sincere heart, not only was his disobedience wiped clean, but he was also forgiven. Not some inferior Old Testament kind of forgiveness, but full-blown, having a relationship with Yahushua, fully restored kind of forgiveness. The person was completely relieved of his guilt and did not have to face it again. Real forgiveness. They were 100% effective for what their purpose was, which was to provide a means of forgiveness for unintentional sins or disobedience. What are we talking about? We're talking about sacrifices. The sacrifices were 100% effective for what their purpose was, which was to provide a means of forgiveness for unintentional disobedience. However, the one thing the Levitical sacrificial system could not do was provide forgiveness for any and all disobedience a man could possibly commit. The behaviours classified as intentional or high-handed could not be forgiven, but were turned over to that part of the Hebrew justice system known as the curse of the instructions. Remember, we dealt with that a couple of episodes ago. The instructions are not a curse, but this legislation was officially called the curse. You've done that intentionally, high-handedly, on purpose, you are now going under the curse. You can't be forgiven. There is no sacrifice available for you. You must be executed. That was called the curse. All the people in the curse of the handed over to the curse of the instructions or curse of the law, taken over to a certain spot, and are executed at a certain point. So, this is where Yahushua's sacrifice comes in. For the one who trusts in Yahushua, even his intentional or high-handed disobedience can be atoned for and forgiven also. His sacrifice was once and for all and fulfilled all the terms and conditions of the sacrificial system. By means of his death, our natures are made clean so that we can come boldly to his throne room, for his blood connects the dimensions. That was the first point, remember, that Yahushua did. He fulfilled the first three sacrifices, which was to deal with our fallen, inclination, our fallen natures. So by means of his death, our natures are made clean. When we come out of the water, we have a new nature, a new heart. So that we can come boldly to his throne room, for his blood connects the dimensions. Through his blood, those dimensions, those circles, remember the earth and the other dimension, higher dimension, can be connected. Yahushua's sacrifice purifies us from every wicked behavior. That's why this is called a purifying sacrifice. Not a sin sacrifice. Bring your sin offering. This is a purifying offering. I need to be purified of this behavior. I need to be purified, so I bring a purifying offering. You can see there in 1 Yahukanon, I should say, 1 Yahukanon, 1 John 1. If we walk in the light as he is in the light, we have fellowship with one another. And the blood of Yahushua purifies us from all disobedience. So there's his blood purifying us from all disobedient behavior. If we walk in the light as he is in the light, that's why we're obedient. Not so that we can follow some legalistic set of rules and regulations. We want to walk in the light. We want to be like him. It's not about trying to prove through our obedience that we can tick off all the boxes of, no, it's simply a case of the sun's shining over there and it's nice and warm. Come and stand with me. But in order to do that, you've got to behave a certain way, because that he is light and we are in darkness. So the more light we get inside us, which is his ruach, his spirit that we exercise the light, and as we do it, it burns the pain of the burning. It burns out the darkness, because if we invite him in with this understanding, in this capacity, we want to overcome. What do we need to, what were we delivered for? Deliverance from evil, the power that evil had over us. And while it may still come through our behaviours, it doesn't own us anymore. We may choose to let it in here and there and out of our mouth holes, but the power of it, the legal power of the prince of this world, does not own us anymore. We have the power through that light, through that spirit in us, to say no. Whereas before, we couldn't. We were a slave. So that's what the purifying does for us. He comes into us and we want to live in the light. The more light we get in us and the more overcoming, the more light you have and the closer you get to Yahushua. The less darkness and more light you have, not only the better do you feel, but the closer you're getting to Yahushua. That's why. It's all about having a relationship and getting closer and closer to the bridegroom. Not just some legalistic BS. It's for a reason. Remember how I said in the beginning of the episode that the purifying offering, this number 4 offering of the purifying offering, it's not a sin offering, because it's not dealing with the actual behavior. It's dealing with the person that has been made unclean from this behavior. It's like being made a slave. Once you disobey Yahushua, you become a slave to that behavior. So we're dealing with the person, not the actual disobedient behavior. That's why it's not a sin offering, it's a purifying offering. So here, the purifying offering really illustrates just how deadly the effects of disobedience can be, as it deals with the diseased state that we find ourselves born into, like being infected with a powerful poison, and the purifying offering being the only antidote to neutralize the effects of the poison. When we are disobedient, it's not just the external consequences we have to deal with. There are also unwelcome internal consequences that will take their toll if not dealt with. Psychological, spiritual damage, or whatever you wish, but our minds are not the same after disobeying Yahushua's instructions. And keep in mind, we're not talking about unintentional disobedience here either. Nothing intentional or high-handed, like adultery, murder, rape, etc. However, even those behaviours we might classify as little or unimportant are still infectious. So you understand that there are full-on consequences, externally and internally, for disobedient behaviour. And you yourself become unclean. And we're not even talking about the high-handed, intentional, full-on, rape, adultery, murder, all those sort of things. We're still talking about, unintentional crimes. Such as, who cares if I do a little work on the Shabbat? Who cares if I eat unclean food every once in a while? Who cares if I take some cheap office supplies that aren't mine? They're all disobedient behaviour. They're all breaking Yahushua's instructions. And they all take a toll on your inner being, on your mind. So that's why people all around in the world today have psychological problems. And they go to the psychiatrists and psychologists and doctors for help, and they just get pills shoved in their face. Self-help rubbish and all this stuff. So do you understand that disobedience is like poison? See the poison there? It's like taking poison, being bitten by the snake. And the purifying offering was like the anointing balm, the healing balm, the antidote for the snake bite, Yahushua's instruction does that to us today, if we're obedient. But if we're disobedient, we have the poison in us. And see, this offering here, that's what it was all about, to purify them, to bring them into a state where they could have a relationship with Yahushua once again. So, with the earlier offerings, the types of animals permitted varied from a bull all the way down to a bird, and it had nothing to do with the degree of one's disobedient behaviour. It was based on what a person could reasonably afford. A bull was the most expensive and a bird was the cheapest. However, with the purifying offering, things were very different now, because the type of animal offered up was directly connected to the trespasser's position in society. The higher the position, the more expensive and larger the animal had to be. Thus, the high priest was obligated to use the priciest and biggest animal offering, which was a 3-year-old bull. So you see, when it comes to actual behaviours, when it was talking about the other offerings, which were for the nature of mankind, and they were voluntary gifts, tributes, bring what you can. It's a heart condition, bring whatever you can reasonably afford. But now, when it's a disobedient behaviour, and this is part 1 of it, this is offering number 4, which is just dealing with the actual purifying of the person. But depending on your status in society, depending on the size of the animal, the expense of the animal. So, we've been talking a lot about behaviours, unintentional behaviours, intentional behaviours. Now we're going to come to what behaviour is actually required, because we're reading it going, well, what's considered an intentional crime? What's considered an unintentional crime? What offering should I bring if I've done this? What offering should I bring if I've done that? Now we're going to come a bit specific. If you are called to testify as a witness about something you've seen or heard, and you refuse to step up and tell the truth, it's evil, and you'll be punished for that behaviour. This makes sense, doesn't it? Even if you only withheld information but didn't participate in a criminal act, if you know about it, Yahushua sees you as being negligent in your duty by way of omission. Oh, I didn't lie because I didn't say anything. It's the same thing. You're disobedience by omission. So even if you only withheld information but didn't actually participate in any criminal act, if you know about it and you didn't step up and say anything, you're evil. Yahushua sees you as being negligent in your duty by way of omission. Because remember, this is a community mindset. Or if you touch anything unclean, like the carcass of an unclean animal, wild or domestic, or a dead reptile, and you weren't aware of it at the time, but now you're contaminated and guilty, just fess up and tell the truth. Or suppose you unknowingly touch something that makes a person unclean. Touching dead animals is unclean. When you realise what you've done, you must admit your guilt. Making rash, stupid vows of any kind, for good or bad, is foolish too. So if this is how you roll, guess what? You're guilty. So I'm not going to go too much into the unclean things yet, because they're coming up in much more detail. But touching unclean animals, dead animals of any sort, I think. And now we're talking about making vows. So the scriptural, so he's saying, don't make stupid vows, good or bad. I mean, that to us doesn't seem like much, does it? But look in the turquoise here. The scriptural definition of a vow is a promise sworn in the name of Yahuwah. to fulfill the declaration he has made. In the ancient days, oaths and vows were much more serious matters than they are in the 21st century. Just as our modern society uses lawyers and written contracts, it was vows and oaths that were the traditional method of forming legal agreements in ancient times. And they were just as binding, if not more so. So, Yahushua said to just let your yes be yes and your no be no. So stop making all these silly vows that you can't keep anyway. Back to the red. So when it finally dawns on you that you've been behaving any of these things, you must be honest and admit it. All right? Fess up. Don't just hide it, fess up. Whether a person is guilty or not has nothing to do with them being aware of their crime. The point is something that should have been done wasn't, or something that should not have been done was done. So just because you might be currently ignorant of it doesn't mean you're innocent. You can still be guilty of something even if you didn't know about it, because you've done it. Whether you know about it or not, you've done it. Then, as a penalty for your disobedient behavior, you must bring me a female from the flock, either sheep or goat. This is a purifying offering that the priest will use to purify you from your disobedience and make you right with me again. A person had to be sorry and repentant of heart for the offering to work. So yeah, that's a good point to make, isn't it? You can't just be, fine, and bring the freaking animal and do. No, it had to be from the heart. Otherwise, it's not going to work. So what does that tell us about what we do in this carcass, in this living dwelling? What does it tell us about the sacrifices we present, which should be ourselves, our behavior, in this living dwelling? Do we do everything gratefully and happily? Or even if we are doing the right thing, we're doing it through a complaint? You know? You can physically do the right thing in a situation, but not feel good about it and not do it with the right attitude. Do you know what I'm saying? So, usually tells you to do something. Fine, I'll do it. And then get back to what I do. Fine, like the behaviour is not right. So, a person had to be sorry and repentant of heart for the offering to work. If not, what's the point? You just do it going through dead ritual. But, here we go. If you cannot afford to bring a sheep, you may bring me 2 turtle doves or 2 young pigeons as the atoning penalty for your behaviour. One of the birds will be for a purifying offering and the other for an ascending near offering. You must bring them to the priest, who will present the first bird as a purifying offering. He will wring its neck, but without severing its head from the body. Then he will sprinkle some of the blood from the purifying offering against the sides of the altar. The blood had to touch the altar, remember? And the rest of the blood will be drained out at the base of the altar. This is an offering for purification. The priest will then prepare the second bird as an ascending near offering, following all the procedures that you have been prescribed. And through this process, the priest will purify you from your disobedient behaviour, making you right with me, and you'll be completely forgiven. So that was for people who couldn't afford the animals. They'd bring a bird, or 2 birds. Now, if you can't afford to bring 2 turtle doves or 2 pigeons, you may bring 2.2 litres of choice flour, semolina, for your purifying offering. Since it's an offering for disobedience to my instructions, you mustn't moisten it with olive oil or put frankincense on it. Take the flour to the priest, who will scoop out a handful as a portion of remembrance to me. Then he will burn it on the altar, on top of the special gifts presented to me. It's an offering for disobedient behaviour, and through this process, the priest will purify those who are guilty any of these things. Funny, the thing that I found, and this was after I'd changed the name of the offering to purifying offering, is that in the same sentence it would say, then bring your sin offering to me to purify you. And I thought, it's written right there. You couldn't work out a word to use other than sin, and yet in the same sentence it says, bring the offering to me to purify you. All through most translations it says, to purify you. It's the purification, purifying, and then it says the sin offering. I thought, what's going on? It's right in front of your nose. So this is a purifying offering to purify you. So that's why I've called it that. So it shows that when Yahushua moves in a situation or through translation, he brings it alive, not just dead translating stuff, through men in robes that don't have his ruach. So priest will purify those who are guilty of any of these things, making them right with me, and they'll be completely forgiven. Completely forgiven. The rest of the flour will belong to the priest, just as with the love grain offering, so they would cook something in their tucker. The atonement. Even the poorest and most destitute person did not get by without providing a sacrificial offering, even if it was just some flour, some semolina. It wasn't about the size or expense of the offering, but about the heart repentance. Right? Of course, if you got higher up in status in society, if you were a tribal leader or a priest or the high priest, then it mattered. You had to bring a specific animal, because you shouldn't, at that level, you shouldn't be being disobedient to start with. So if you are, the severity of the punishment is greater. Shows us today, the more you're given, the more is required from you, and the more attack you will have on you. So that's the purpose. You should understand this, guys. And we can see that Yahushua fulfilled every single part of this sacrifice by purifying us. And what we're going to see also in our next episode is that this offering today, the purifying offering, and the next one as well, those two offerings were taken, part of it were taken, the priest had to go outside the camp. And we're going to see the significance of that too, because Yahushua went there for us. He went and had his relationship severed with the higher dimension, and that was the only thing that empowered him, the higher dimension, the Father. And he had his relationship severed for us, the thing he feared the most. Imagine being exposed to the thing that you fear the most. Imagine lying in a bathtub full of snakes, full of cockroaches, full of maggots, having them all come in your mouth and out your nose. And imagine being exposed to something that disgusts you and just freaks you out. Imagine, well, that's what Yahushua did, because he dwells in the most set apart place on the seat of atonement, on the ark of the blood covenant witness, and that's where he is, in a set apart place. And he actually came in the flesh and became unclean. They took him outside the camp to burn him up with the criminals, to execute him with the criminals. So can you see how by going through Leviticus and just the severity of disobedience, the severity of you really get to see the fine print of what Yahushua truly did on the torture stake. And it's not just lumped into some big, oh yeah, he's forgiven us, we don't need to know all that. Sin is sin, and no. Every behavior has a consequence. And while Yahushua may have made us acceptable in the sight of the higher dimension, washed us clean and made us acceptable, all those messengers and Yahushua, all the interdimensional creatures are watching your behavior on a daily basis, watching what you do when no one's looking, watching how you treat wife, children, husband, clients, customers, watching, writing down your behavior. So while we may be, yes, purified once and for all by the blood of Yahushua, how's your relationship as far as getting closer and closer to Yahushua? Because every disobedient behavior just takes you that much further back in the race, severing your relationship. You can't, unless you completely deny Yahushua and walk away back into the world and deny him, you can't sever your relationship. He promises never to leave us. We will always be washed clean and considered clean, but our behavior can keep us away from him. He can come as close as he wants to us, but our behavior keeps us away from him because we don't want to go into the light because our deeds are wicked. So stay strong, brothers and sisters, and we'll be back next episode, and we're going to deal with our last main sacrifice number 5, which was the forgiveness offering. So I love you guys. Bye-bye.